Rain slammed against the broken pavement as Amara stood frozen, clutching the soaked divorce papers in her trembling hands. "Mom, why is Daddy leaving us?" Her 5-year-old son's voice cut through the storm like a blade. She didn't answer. Across the street, under the dim yellow glow of a flickering light, her husband stood beside her best friend, laughing. Laughing, like 10 years of love meant nothing. "Amara," he shouted over the rain, his voice cold, impatient. "Stop making a scene and sign it." Her fingers tightened around the paper. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. Her best friend, Ngozi, the same woman she had cried to, trusted, shared her deepest fears with, stepped forward and wrapped an arm around him. "You're embarrassing yourself," Ngozi said, her tone sharp, almost annoyed. "Just let him go." Something inside Amara shattered. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Her son tugged her dress. "Mom, did I do something wrong?" That question broke her. She dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms as the rain soaked them both. "No, no, baby," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You did nothing wrong." But deep inside, she knew. Everything had gone wrong. If you've ever trusted someone and they broke you in ways you didn't expect, you'll understand this story. Before we continue, take a second to subscribe, like, and share, because stories like this remind us that sometimes the people the world ignores rise the highest. Amara stared at the signature line. Her name, her marriage, her life, all reduced to ink on wet paper. "Sign it," her husband repeated, his voice lower now, almost threatening. "I don't have all day." She slowly stood up. Her legs felt weak, but her eyes had changed. Not angry, not desperate, just empty. "Is she worth it?" she asked quietly. He didn't hesitate. "Yes." That one word ended everything. No hesitation, no regret, just certainty. Amara let out a shaky breath, then signed. The pen slipped slightly in her wet fingers, but the signature was clear. Final. She handed the paper back. Ngozi smirked. "Good choice," she said. Amara didn't respond. She simply turned, held her son's hand, and walked away. No screaming, no begging, no looking back. But behind her silence, a storm was beginning. The first night was the hardest. Not because she didn't know where to sleep, but because her son kept asking questions she couldn't answer. "Mom, when will Daddy come back?" She forced a smile. "Soon." A lie. "Will he bring me toys?" Another lie. "Yes." Her son smiled and hugged her. "I'll be good so he won't leave again." That broke her all over again. She turned away quickly, pretending to fix something in the tiny room they had just rented. But tears streamed down her face. Silent, unseen, heavy. Days turned into weeks. Reality hit hard. The landlord knocked constantly. "Madam, rent is not charity, yo." Employers rejected her. "You have a child? That will be a problem." Friends disappeared. Calls stopped. Messages unread. Even her own family judged her. "You should have endured your marriage," her aunt said over the phone. "A woman must be patient." Patient? With betrayal? With humiliation? With being replaced? Amara said nothing. She had learned something important. Nobody really cares when you're suffering. One evening, after a long day of job hunting, she returned home exhausted. Her son ran to her. "Mom, I didn't eat the biscuit. I kept it for you." He held out a half-crushed pack of biscuits like it was gold. Her chest tightened. "You should have eaten it," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, you need strength." She smiled. But that night, when he fell asleep, she sat on the floor, staring at that biscuit, and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like someone who had no energy left to fight. The next morning, she took a job as a cleaner in a small restaurant. The pay was terrible. The hours were long. The insults were constant. "Hey, you missed a spot. Are you blind?" Single mothers are always like this, distracted. She swallowed everything. Every insult. Every humiliation. Because she had no choice. At school, things weren't better for her son. "Where is your father?" a boy asked. He stayed quiet. "My dad said kids without fathers are useless," another added. That was the day he fought. He didn't win, but he didn't back down. When Amara was called to the school, she was exhausted. "Your son is becoming a problem," the teacher said. Amara looked at him, bruised, silent, hurt. "I'm sorry," she said. But her son shook his head. "I'm not sorry," he said quietly. "They said you're nothing." The room went silent. Amara's throat tightened. She reached for his hand. "Let's go home," she whispered. That night, something changed. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring into nothing. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. She wasn't speaking to anyone, just releasing the weight. Her son walked up to her and hugged her tightly. "I'll grow fast, Mommy," he said, "so you don't have to suffer like this." Her breath caught. She held him tighter than ever before. "No," she said firmly. "You don't have to grow fast. Just stay my baby." But deep inside, she knew he already wasn't. Days passed. Struggles increased. Hope decreased. Until one afternoon, everything began to change. That day, she was late to pick her son from school. Work had delayed her again. When she finally arrived, she saw a small crowd gathered near the gate. People were whispering. Some were watching, but no one was helping. Her heart started racing. She pushed through the crowd, and then she saw it. Her son, kneeling beside an elderly man lying on the ground. "Sir, please wake up," he was saying, his voice shaking. The man wasn't moving. People stood around, doing nothing. "Someone call for help," her son shouted. No one moved. Amara's heart pounded. She rushed forward. "What happened?" "He just fell," her son said, panicking. "Nobody is helping him." Amara looked around. Faces, phones, whispers, but no action. Something inside her snapped. "Help me lift him," she shouted. Finally, one man stepped forward. Reluctantly, they carried the old man to the side. Her son held the man's hand tightly. "Sir, don't worry. You won't die," he said softly. Amara froze. Those words, so simple, so pure, so powerful. "Why are you saying that?" she asked gently. Her son looked at her. "Because you said nobody should die alone." Her heart broke and healed at the same time. Far away, inside a black luxury car parked across the street, a man watched everything. Silent, unblinking. His expression didn't change, but his eyes lingered on the boy. Something about that moment felt different. That man was not just anyone. He was a Korean billionaire known for his cold heart and ruthless decisions. And for the first time in years, something inside him moved. The old man's chest rose faintly as they laid him down, and for a moment, it felt like the entire world held its breath. Is he alive?" Amara asked, her voice tight. Her son nodded quickly. "He moved. I saw him move." A small sigh of relief passed through the crowd, but still, no one stepped forward with real urgency. Amara looked around, anger flashing briefly in her tired eyes. "Why is nobody calling an ambulance?" "I already did," a voice shouted from behind. Moments later, the sound of a siren cut through the tension. Her son still held the old man's hand, refusing to let go. "Sir, please stay," he whispered. "My mom is here now. You'll be okay." Amara watched him, her chest tightening again. Even in all their suffering, he still had this kindness. Where did he get that from? Not from the world. Definitely not from the world. The ambulance arrived quickly, and the paramedics rushed in. "What happened?" one of them asked. "He collapsed," Amara replied. "He was just lying there. No one was helping." The paramedic nodded and began working. As they lifted the old man onto the stretcher, her son stepped back slowly, his small hand still slightly stretched forward, like he didn't want to let go. "Will he be okay?" he asked. The paramedic gave a brief nod. "We'll do our best." That was enough for him. He exhaled deeply. Across the street, inside the black car, the billionaire leaned slightly forward. "Find out who they are," he said quietly. The driver hesitated for a second. "Sir." "The woman and the boy." His tone left no room for questions. "Yes, sir." The car engine started, but his gaze didn't leave the scene until the ambulance drove off. Something about that boy's voice. Something about those words. It echoed in his mind. "My mom says no one should die alone." He closed his eyes briefly, and for the first time in a long time, a memory he had buried began to resurface. That night, Amara sat on the edge of the bed again. But this time, she wasn't crying. She was thinking. The image of the old man on the ground, the crowd doing nothing, her son stepping forward without hesitation. It stayed with her. "Mom," her son said softly, lying beside her. "Do you think he has a family?" "I'm sure he does," she replied. "Then they'll be happy we helped him." She smiled faintly. "Yes, they will." There was a pause. "Mom." "Yes. If I grow up, I want to help people like that." Her throat tightened. "You already are," she said quietly. The next few days went back to normal, or at least what their normal had become. Work, struggle, survival. But something subtle had shifted. Amara didn't notice it yet, but someone else did. Inside a large, quiet office, the billionaire sat behind a wide desk, a file open in front of him. Photos, reports, details, everything about Amara and her son. She works 2 jobs, his assistant said. Cleaner at a restaurant and occasionally does laundry work for people. He flipped a page. No husband. Divorced. Another page. Struggling financially. He paused. And the boy? Top of his class, the assistant replied. Despite everything, very well behaved. No record of trouble except one recent incident. What incident? A fight in school. The billionaire's eyes lifted slightly. Why? The assistant hesitated, then answered. He was defending his mother. Silence filled the room. The billionaire leaned back slowly. Something about that answer stirred something deeper. Continue observing them, he said. Yes, sir. And don't let them know. Of course. That same afternoon, Amara was at work, scrubbing the floor as usual. Faster, her boss snapped. Customers are coming in. I'm trying, she replied, her voice low. Trying is not enough, he said sharply. If you can't handle it, there are many people outside who can. She nodded quietly. I understand. She always understood. But nobody understood her. Later that evening, as she walked home with her son, he suddenly stopped. Mom, look. Across the street, a sleek black car was parked. The same one from before. But she didn't recognize it. To her, it was just another car. Come on, she said gently. Let's go home. But as they walked past, the window rolled down slightly. The billionaire watched them. Closer now. Clearer. The boy laughed at something his mother said. Simple. Pure. Unforced. He looked away quickly. Something about that happiness felt unfamiliar. Days turned into a week. Then 2. And slowly, something began to change. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. But steadily. One evening, Amara returned home to find a bag of groceries at her door. She frowned. Did you buy this? She asked her son. He shook his head. No. She looked around. No one. Maybe someone made a mistake, she said. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't a mistake. The next day, it happened again. This time, it wasn't just food. It was money, carefully placed in an envelope. No name. No message. Just help. She didn't touch it at first. Mom, what if it's for us? Her son asked. What if it's not? She replied. They stared at it together. Uncertain. Confused. Grateful, but cautious. That night, she made a decision. She took only what they needed. Nothing more. I don't want to depend on something we don't understand, she said. Her son nodded. I understand. From a distance, the billionaire watched everything unfold. She didn't take all of it, his assistant reported. He nodded slowly. I expected that. There was a pause. She's different, the assistant added. He didn't respond. But his eyes said enough. One evening, he decided to see for himself. Not from a car. Not from a report. But up close. Amara was washing clothes outside when she heard footsteps. She looked up. A tall man stood there, dressed simply, but something about him felt different. Calm. Controlled. Powerful. Yes? She asked. I'm looking for someone, he said. Who? He glanced briefly at her son, who stood nearby. A boy, he replied. Her body tensed slightly. That's my son. There was a brief silence. Then the man stepped closer. Thank you, he said. She frowned. For what? For helping someone when no one else did. Her eyes narrowed slightly. How do you know about that? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked at her son. You were brave, he said. The boy smiled shyly. My mom says we should help people. The man's gaze shifted back to Amara. For a moment, something passed between them. Unspoken, unclear, but powerful. Then he reached into his pocket and brought out a card. If you ever need help, he said, handing it to her. She hesitated. I don't take favors from strangers. I'm not a stranger, he replied calmly. She looked at the card. No name, just a number, and a simple symbol. She looked back up, but he was already walking away. Her son looked at her. Mom, who was that? She stared at the card. Something about it felt important. I don't know, she said softly. But deep inside, she felt it. Their lives were about to change. Amara didn't sleep well that night. The card sat on the small wooden table, untouched, but not forgotten. She had turned it over so many times, trying to understand what kind of man would appear, say so little, and leave behind something that felt so heavy. Mom, are you thinking about him? Her son asked quietly from the bed. She turned slightly. Go to sleep. But you're not sleeping. She forced a small smile. Adults have a lot to think about. He sat up slowly, his eyes searching hers. Is he a bad man? The question caught her off guard. She paused. I don't know, she said honestly. There was a silence. Then the boy lay back down. I think he's a good man, he murmured. Why? Because he said thank you. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Children saw things differently, sometimes more clearly. The next morning, life continued as usual. Struggle didn't pause for mystery. She tied her hair back, wore her faded uniform, and prepared for another long day. Stay out of trouble in school, she told her son. I always do, he replied. She raised an eyebrow. Okay, I try. She almost laughed. Almost. At school, things had not improved. If anything, they had gotten worse. Look at him, one boy whispered loudly. He doesn't even look like his mother. Another laughed. Maybe she doesn't even know who his father is. The words hit harder this time, because they were closer to something deeper, something sensitive. The boy clenched his fists. I know who my father is, he said quietly. Where is he then? The first boy shot back. He didn't answer, because he didn't know. Not really. Later that day, Amara was called again. This time, her son wasn't in trouble, but something felt off. Madam, the teacher said carefully, your son is different. Amara frowned slightly. Different how? He's very intelligent, observant, mature beyond his age. That's not a problem. No, it's not, the teacher agreed. But the other children are starting to notice his background, his appearance. Amara's expression hardened slightly. What about it? The teacher hesitated. He doesn't look fully local. The words were chosen carefully, but the meaning was clear. Amara's grip tightened around her bag. I see, she said quietly. That evening, she walked home with her son in silence. She kept glancing at him, at his face, at the shape of his eyes, the softness of his features, things she had never questioned before. Not because she didn't know, but because she had chosen not to think about it. Mom, why are you looking at me like that? He asked. She blinked quickly. I'm not. You are. She sighed softly. Does it bother you what they say in school? He kicked a small stone on the road. Sometimes. What do they say? He hesitated, then shrugged. That I don't belong. Her heart tightened. She stopped walking. Gently, she knelt in front of him. Listen to me, she said firmly. You belong with me. That's all that matters. He nodded slowly, but his eyes still held questions. Questions she wasn't ready to answer. Far away, in a quiet office, the billionaire sat in silence. The report in front of him was no longer just information. It was becoming personal. She hasn't contacted us, his assistant said. I didn't expect her to. She's very cautious. He nodded slightly. That's not a weakness. There was a pause. Sir, do you want to proceed to the next step? His fingers tapped lightly against the table. Then he stopped. Yes. The next day, something unexpected happened. Amara was called into her boss's office. She walked in carefully. Sir, you wanted to see me? Her boss leaned back, studying her. You've been here for a while now, he said. Yes. You work hard. She nodded slightly. I try my best. He leaned forward. I received a call about you. Her brows furrowed. A call? Yes. From who? He shrugged. They didn't say much. Just that you deserve better. Her heart skipped. What does that mean? It means, he said slowly, you're being promoted. She blinked. Promoted? Yes. Less cleaning. More supervision. She stared at him, confused. I don't understand. Neither do I, he replied honestly. But someone out there thinks you're worth more. That evening, she stood outside her house again, the card still in her hand, now heavier than ever. Mom, are you going to call him? Her son asked. She looked at the number, then back at him. I don't know. He smiled slightly. I think you should. Why? Because maybe not everyone wants to hurt us. She stared at him, and for a moment, she believed him. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a man sat alone in a dim room. A familiar face. Older, rougher, bitter. Amara's ex-husband. He slammed a glass onto the table. You said this was a better life, he snapped. Ngozi rolled her eyes. I never promised you comfort. I promised you freedom. This is not freedom, he growled. This is struggle. She laughed dryly. Welcome to reality. His jaw tightened. I left everything for you. And I left nothing for you. She shot back. That was your choice. Silence filled the room. Heavy, ugly, regretful. Back in her small home, Amara finally made a decision. She dialed the number. It rang once, twice. Then, hello. His voice. Calm, controlled, unfamiliar, yet somehow expected. She swallowed. This is Amara. A brief pause. I know. Her heart raced. I received your card. I know. She closed her eyes briefly. Why are you helping me? Why are you helping me? There was a longer pause this time. Then he spoke. Because your son reminded me of something I lost. Her breath caught. What does that mean? It means, he said quietly, I would like to meet you again. She hesitated. Every instinct told her to be careful, but something deeper told her this moment mattered. When? She asked softly. Tomorrow. As the call ended, she stood still. Her son watched her closely. Well, he asked. She looked down at him, and for the first time in a long time, there was something new in her eyes. Not fear, not pain, but something unfamiliar. Hope, but far away. Someone else was watching her life unfold again. And this time, he wasn't smiling. Amara barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard his voice again. Your son reminded me of something I lost. It echoed in her mind like a quiet mystery she couldn't solve. By morning, she was already dressed, standing in front of the small mirror, adjusting her hair for the third time. Mom, you're nervous, her son said, watching her closely. I'm not. You are. She sighed softly. Maybe a little. He smiled. Don't worry. He's a good man. She looked at him. You said that last time. And I'm still right. For a moment, she wished she could see the world as simply as he did. The meeting place was nothing like she expected. A quiet, elegant restaurant. Clean, calm, far from the chaos she was used to. She hesitated at the entrance. Mom, let's go, her son said, gently pulling her hand. They stepped inside. Immediately, she felt out of place. People glanced at her simple clothes, at her worn shoes. She almost turned back. Amara. She froze. That voice. She turned slowly. He was already standing, calm, composed, watching her. Thank you for coming, he said. She nodded slightly. Thank you for inviting us. Her son looked up at him and smiled. Hello, sir. The billionaire's expression softened, just slightly. Hello. They sat down. The silence was not uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. Finally, Amara spoke. Why are you really helping us? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her son. What's your name? He asked. The boy answered proudly. Then he asked, why do you help people you don't know? The billionaire paused, then said quietly, because someone once helped me when I needed it most. The boy nodded, satisfied. But Amara wasn't. That's not enough, she said firmly. People don't just help like this. Not without a reason. He looked at her, directly. You want honesty? Yes. He leaned forward slightly. Your son reminds me of someone I couldn't protect. Her breath caught. The way he said it. It wasn't casual. It was heavy, personal. What happened? She asked softly. He held her gaze for a moment, then looked away. I failed, he said simply. Silence fell. Not empty, but full. The food arrived, but Amara barely touched hers. Her son, however, was fascinated. Mom, look at this, he whispered. She smiled faintly. For a moment, things felt normal, almost peaceful. Then something unexpected happened. A man walked into the restaurant. Loud, careless, familiar. Amara's entire body went still. Her son noticed immediately. Mom, what's wrong? She didn't answer, because she couldn't. Not when the past had just walked back into her present. Her ex-husband. He hadn't seen her yet. He was busy arguing with someone on the phone. I told you, I don't have the money right now, he snapped. His voice hadn't changed. Still harsh. Still impatient. Still selfish. The billionaire noticed the shift instantly. Do you know him? He asked quietly. Amara's voice came out barely above a whisper. That's my ex-husband. His eyes narrowed slightly. Is he a problem? She hesitated, then shook her head. No, not anymore. But her hands were shaking. As if sensing something, the ex-husband turned and saw her. Everything stopped. For a moment, he just stared, confused, surprised. Then his eyes moved to the man sitting across from her. Well-dressed, calm, powerful, and something changed in his expression. Something ugly. He walked over slowly. Well, he said, forcing a smile. Amara. She didn't stand. She didn't smile. She didn't respond. Long time, he added. Still nothing. His gaze shifted to her son, then back to her. So this is where you ended up? The insult was subtle, but clear. The billionaire spoke calmly. You should leave. The ex-husband laughed. And you are? A man who doesn't repeat himself. The air grew tense. The ex-husband smirked. Ah, I see, he said, nodding slowly. You've upgraded. Amara's jaw tightened. That's enough, she said quietly. But he wasn't done. You always did know how to survive, he added. Find someone else to take care of you. That was it. Before she could respond, her son spoke. You shouldn't talk to my mom like that. The table went silent. The ex-husband looked down at him. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. But it passed quickly. Stay out of this, he said coldly. The billionaire's voice dropped slightly. Leave. Now. This time, there was no softness in it. Just authority. Real authority. For a second, it looked like the ex-husband would argue. But then he noticed something. The way people in the restaurant were watching. The way the staff suddenly seemed more attentive. The way the man sitting across from Amara didn't need to raise his voice to be taken seriously. He stepped back, smirked. This isn't over, he said quietly, then walked away. Amara didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe properly, until her son reached for her hand. Mom, it's okay. She looked at him and slowly nodded. The billionaire watched her carefully. He's still affecting you, he said. She shook her head. No, he's just a reminder. Of what? She hesitated, then said quietly, of who I used to be. There was a long silence. Then he spoke again. You're not that person anymore. She looked at him. How do you know? He held her gaze. Because you didn't break. Her breath caught. For the first time, someone had seen her strength. Not her struggle. Not her failure. Her strength. Why are you really doing this? She asked again. This time softer. Less defensive. More searching. He leaned back slightly, then said something that changed everything. I want to help you rebuild your life. Her heart skipped. That's not something you just offer someone. I know. Then why me? He looked at her son, then back at her. Because some people deserve a second chance and never get one. Her eyes filled slightly, but she blinked it back. I don't want charity. It's not charity. What is it then? He paused, then said quietly, an opportunity. She stared at him, conflicted, careful, hopeful, but afraid to admit it. Think about it, he added. I will. As they stood to leave, her son looked up at him again. Sir. Yes. Thank you for helping my mom. The billionaire didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded. But inside, something was changing. Faster now. Stronger. Outside, as they walked away, Amara held her son's hand tightly. Mom, are you okay? He asked. She looked down at him, then ahead. I think things are about to change. But neither of them knew just how much. Because far behind them, the past was not done. And this time, it was coming back with intention. The days after the dinner passed in an unusual calm. Amara felt lighter. Her son laughed more. She began trusting life again, little by little. But the calm was deceptive. It started with small things, a mysterious envelope at her doorstep, the kind only someone watching her could leave. Inside, papers, numbers, hints of trouble. Her brow furrowed. This doesn't make sense. Her son peeked over her shoulder. Mom, is it bad? She swallowed. It's complicated, but we can handle it. Later that week, she returned home from her second job to find someone waiting. The ex-husband, his expression smug, Ngozi behind him, wearing a faintly victorious smile. So, he began, you've rebuilt your life. Impressive, but let's not pretend the world is done with you yet. Amara's jaw tightened. What do you want? Just settling old scores, he said, casually tossing a folder onto her table. Financial records. Legal actions. I've made sure you're tangled in debt. You'll see soon. Her stomach dropped. Her son's eyes widened. Before she could react, the door opened wider. A calm voice filled the room. Not today. The billionaire stepped in, his presence immediately commanding attention. He held an envelope of his own. Her ex-husband froze. Who? I've been watching, he said, his eyes locked on Ngozi and the ex. I've been making sure nothing truly harms them. The twist hit Amara slowly. The man she thought had merely helped her out of kindness had actually been protecting them from far worse. Every donation, every quiet assistance, every silent observation, he had orchestrated it. The ex-husband laughed nervously. You can't stop us. I already have, the billionaire said. He flipped the envelope open, revealing a series of contracts and evidence. Everything you did exposed. And anyone trying to interfere again will answer to me. Ngozi's confident smirk faltered. This isn't possible. Amara's eyes widened. All this time you knew. He looked at her gently. I saw the danger you were in. I couldn't let them ruin your life again. Her chest swelled, a mixture of relief and awe. Then, something unexpected happened. Her son, small but fearless, stepped forward. He pointed at the ex-husband. You thought you could scare my mom. But you forgot something. What? The ex-husband sneered. I'm her son, and I protect her too. The boy reached for the smartphone he had hidden in his backpack earlier. Evidence he had found of the ex-husband and Ngozi's plans. He had captured messages, bank transfers, everything. The room went silent. The ex-husband and Ngozi stared in disbelief. The tables had turned. You can't, Ngozi stammered. Amara stepped forward for the first time, her presence commanding. It's over. You both underestimated us. You underestimated her. And most of all, you underestimated this boy. Her son looked up at her, proud. Mom, we did it. She felt tears prick her eyes. Yes, we did. The billionaire knelt slightly, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. You've both shown courage and heart. That's rare. Her son's face lit up. Thank you, sir. He looked at Amara. Mom, see? I told you not everyone is going to hurt us. Amara smiled, the weight of years lifting. In the aftermath, Amara realized the depth of what had happened. Her ex-husband and best friend's betrayal had nearly cost her everything. The billionaire had been silently protecting her and her child the entire time. And her son, the little Afro-Korean boy with bravery beyond his years, had played a decisive role in saving them. This wasn't just luck. This was justice, courage, and timing perfectly aligned. The next evening, they stood together outside the small home that had once been a symbol of struggle, now a symbol of survival and strength. The billionaire turned to Amara. You've rebuilt your life and done it with grace. She looked at him. I couldn't have done it alone. He smiled softly. You didn't have to, but I'm glad I could be there. Her son tugged at her hand. Mom, will he be part of our lives now? Amara glanced at him, then at the man beside her. I think he already is. Weeks later, Amara had a small celebration with her son. She finally felt a sense of permanence in her life. She had regained dignity, security, peace. Her phone pinged, a message from the billionaire. Meet me at the park. I have something for both of you. Her son cheered. Mom, adventure. Amara laughed, and as they walked to meet him, she realized life hadn't just changed, it had transformed. And as she walked hand in hand with her son, the story of betrayal, struggle, and near defeat had turned into one of hope, empowerment, and unexpected protection. Call to action. If you felt every twist, every tear, every victory with Amara and her son, don't forget to like this video, show your support for their journey. Subscribe to the channel, more emotional Afro-Korean stories are coming. Comment below, what would you have done in Amara's shoes? Share with someone who loves stories of courage and unexpected triumph. Because life is full of twists, some painful, some surprising, and some unforgettable.